Welcome to the Dinosaur George podcast, a show about paleontology and other earth sciences. Dinosaur George is a public speaker, author, and TV host with 30 years of study in paleontology. He has performed live in over 4,500 events across the US and Canada. Now, here is Dinosaur George.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 116. I'm Dinosaur George. In this episode, our feature creature is Leptoceratops, which is a really interesting little dinosaur. And I've got an interview with Dr. Frank Varriale from Kings Collage. This interview talks about some research that he did with Leptoceratops, and it's very interesting stuff. It's about how they chew their food, which is really using some technological advancements on looking at the actual teeth under electron microscope to see the wear patterns on them, which is really interesting. But what I really liked about this interview is that Dr. Varriale goes into a lot of detail about the amount of work that a scientist does before they make their announcements. And what's really interesting about this is this conversation, our conversation goes into much greater detail than just the work that he does or that he did with Leptoceratops. It really goes into the detail about the depth of work. You know, sometimes when we read an article about a scientific discovery or an announcement or a hypothesis, sometimes it's easy to sort of just think they just arrived at this with not a lot of work. But when you really understand the detail and depth of work that scientists go through, I think it will give you a much better appreciation for all of the things that goes into it, and how the next time you read any sort of article about a recent discovery or a finding, you might be more inclined to read greater detail about it, understanding what goes into it. All right, a couple of things going on. I had the opportunity yesterday to go to, and by the way, today is December 14th, so that would have been December 13th, 2016. There was a teacher in Laredo, Texas, who contacted me and told me she had a young boy, his name was Juan, who was not doing very well in school. Juan didn't want to go to school. His parents had a tough time getting Juan to go to school. And when he was there, he didn't want to do any work. He didn't want to do anything. His grades were suffering. But Juan loved dinosaurs. That's really his deal. And she contacted me back in early November to tell me about this. And she asked if I could think of a way to maybe encourage Juan to start to do better. You know, sometimes we get into these ruts as people, and kids do the same thing, where if something changes a little bit, it can make a huge impact in our life. And so she asked me, could I think of something? Well, what I decided to do was I decided to make a deal with Juan. If Juan didn't miss any school from November to December, and if he did all of his work, and if his grades improved, I told him I would go down to Laredo and I would do a performance for every kid in the school. And so all the other kids really encouraged Juan, and his parents got behind it, and his teachers got behind it, and the principal got behind it. And what do you think happened? Juan never missed another day. He did his work. His grades came up dramatically, and Juan felt a sense of accomplishment. And he was so excited. And so I'm happy to say that yesterday I went down there and I did a performance. Actually did two of them. I split the school in half because there were so many kids. I did two performances for all the students in the room. And so Juan was the hero for the day. The kids absolutely loved him. And it was my pleasure to do it. But the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes you can do a little and really get a lot. And that's what I felt. It's the greatest Christmas gift I could have gotten, was to see Juan and his parents and all the classmates enjoying themselves. So I had a great time. And I hope that if you ever get the opportunity to do something nice for someone, you take that opportunity and you do it, because you never know where that's going to lead or who you're going to impact. All right, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about Leptoceratops, and then we'll get into that interview with Dr. Varriale, and I assure you it is really interesting, and I think you're going to enjoy it.
Bring Dinosaur George's traveling exhibit to your school, museum, or city. This is the largest exhibit of its kind in North America and will turn any facility into a natural history museum. You'll see things like prehistoric mammals, giant fish, ancient reptiles, and of course, dinosaurs. It's affordable, amazing, and will be an event you'll never forget. See complete details at dinosaurgeorge.com or call us toll-free, 888-487-7478. Bring Dinosaur George's Traveling Museum to your community today.
It's time for our Feature Creature segment. If you would like to suggest a creature, go to dinosaurgeorgepodcast.com and post it in the comments section of this episode, or email us your suggestions to contact@dinosaurgeorge.com. And now, our feature creature.
This episode's feature creature is Leptoceratops. It was suggested by listener Martin Fernandez. Martin made the suggestion on our podcast page, and so I wanted to thank him for making that suggestion. I appreciate it very much, Martin, and I appreciate you listening. Leptoceratops means little horn face. That's what his name means in English. He's a cousin of Triceratops, and it lived during the late Cretaceous between 66 and 68 million years ago and is found in western North America. It's a quadruped, semi-biped, meaning that it could walk on all fours, but it could also walk on its hind legs. Now, here's the kind of cool thing about him. His hands, those are the front ones, were held in what sort of would look like a clapping position, meaning they were inward towards each other, not flat like other members of the ceratopsians. So it may be possible, because of those little inward-facing arms, maybe he was bipedal all the time. Maybe he only preferred to walk around on his hind legs. It may have been able to actually run on its hind legs because of those unusual positions of the hands. So my guess is, if you would have seen this little dinosaur, you probably would have seen him about 90% of the time walking around on his hind legs, which is kind of funny when you think about that for a member of the Ceratopsian family, but Psittacosaurus could do the same thing. So it's an interesting thing, and what it demonstrates is you can be a member of a larger group, but you don't have to have identical features to be in that larger group. When you look at Leptoceratops's head, it looks very, very similar, the beak, to that of any member of the Ceratopsian family, like Styracosaurus or Monoclonius or Centrosaurus or any of those guys. And I don't even know if Monoclonius now is a legitimate name, is it? I don't think it is anymore. I don't know if Monoclonius maintained his name or if they discovered it was another dinosaur. Anyway, terrible example if it was. But anyway, he has that very ceratopsian-looking beak. It doesn't have any horns, but he's got that ceratopsian-looking beak. So even though he's a member of the family, he may have walked and acted very different than some of his other close relatives. This little dinosaur is about 6 feet long and weighed about 150 pounds. It was discovered in 1910 by Barnum Brown in Canada, and since then they found specimens in Wyoming. But they're a very rare dinosaur. And why is it that some dinosaurs are very poorly known, that we very seldom find things? It could be a number of things. One, when you're little, your bones are not as likely to be preserved under all of the normal conditions that preserve big bones, because your bones are small. They're more subjected to being destroyed, to crumble into dust, not to be able to even see them when you're digging for bones. So that's one reason. But some people think maybe these little dinosaurs lived at maybe higher elevations, meaning farther up into the lowland hills area, maybe not in the mountains, but up in the higher elevations. And when you live there, your chances of becoming a fossil are much less likely. To become a fossil, you need to be buried in some sort of sediment. And that's almost always attributed to flooding. So if you live in the lowland areas, that's where the water goes. That's where all the silt and sand and sediment flows. And so if you die in those areas, the chances are better that your body is going to be covered by that sediment. If you live in the upper areas, it's not quite as likely that you're going to be buried. So what'll happen is your body will lay exposed. Scavengers will pick you to pieces, and then your bones will literally bake in the sun. become incredibly brittle and turn to dust, and there's no evidence left behind. So maybe it's possible that this little dinosaur lived in the upland areas. But when we come back, we'll get some more information about the feeding habits, how this animal chewed his food, and then we'll get into the details of the amount of work that goes into the writing of scientific papers.
Would you like to buy fossil replica skulls, teeth, claws, and more? Then visit our catalog at store.dinosaurgeorge.com. We sell replicas rather than real fossils so that we don't deplete the resources. Our replicas and casts are museum quality and look real, but are much more affordable. From dinosaurs to ice-aged mammals to modern animal skulls, there is something for everyone. Visit our online catalog at store.dinosaurgeorge.com and start your collection of amazing fossil replicas today.
All right, we're back. Earlier, we talked about the statistical information about our feature creature, which is Leptoceratops, but we're very fortunate to have with us someone who can give us much greater details about this little herbivore. Here to discuss his research on dental microwear and mastication, which are fancy words for how he chewed, is Assistant Professor of Biology from Kings College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Dr. Frank Varriale. Dr. Varriale, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, George.
I really appreciate, and I know how busy you are this time of the year. It's crazy, especially for anybody that's teaching. This is a crazy time. So I really appreciate you taking time to do this. So before we get into detail about your research, can you give us a little background information about you?
Sure. Let's see. So I grew up in upstate New York. I hail from Hudson Valley region. Anywhere from Albany to Saratoga is where my family lives. And when I was a kid, I would hunt brachiopods in the shale and look for crinoids in the various limestones near my home, but we never had any dinosaurs. And early on, like a lot of people in paleo, I became very interested in dinosaurs. And so all throughout high school, I chose to explore a science education. I became very interested in biology. Then when it was time to go and have a career, I did my undergraduate degree at SUNY Oswego in zoology, and then I wanted to move on to more specific paleo aspirations. So when it came time to get my next degree, I wanted to go to a school that specifically had a paleontology program. So I chose South Dakota School of Mines. They had a master's degree in paleo. And when I arrived there, I quickly realized that I had very little in the way of geological education. So while I was there, at the same time I was getting my master's in paleo, I was earning the equivalent of an undergraduate degree or a kind of minor in geology. And then when I finished my master's degree there and I wanted to move on to my PhD, family issues kind of dictated my choice of schools. I wanted to be back on the East Coast again, so somewhere that was within decent driving range of upstate New York. So I applied to a bunch of schools on the East Coast, and Hopkins accepted me, and I was very happy to go there because one of the people I really wanted to work under was David Weissample. So I did my PhD at Johns Hopkins, and while I was there, my dissertation topic was the evolution of mastication in ceratopsian dinosaurs and using dental microwear, these small pits and scratches that form on teeth when an organism is chewing, to figure out jaw mechanics, or at least the directions in which the jaw was moving that are recorded on the teeth when the animal was alive. So that then brings us into this work that you did on Leptoceratops, which I find absolutely fascinating in reading your work. So can you kind of give us sort of a nutshell overview of what you did and the amount of work that went into it? One of the things I want all the listeners to understand is when you hear someone like Dr. Varriale talk about the results that he got, sometimes we don't quite understand what it took to get those results. So can you kind of give us sort of an overview first of what your study was and then go into detail about how you arrived at your conclusions? Sure. So my ultimate goal, and the Leptoceratops paper that we're referring to, is just a small portion of a much larger kind of research program into dinosaur dental microwear, and specifically the ceratopsians. I'm kind of sitting on a lot of data right now, and a lot of done stuff that I'm slowly working into publication, but I wanted to get the Leptoceratops stuff out because that is one of the most interesting stories that came from the research, and it tells a good story, and it sets a stage, and it sets a background for the stuff that's coming on my other ceratopsian work. But the work in general, what prompted the work was, the crazy thing is, and science kind of works this way sometimes too, I was originally going to do an entirely different dissertation. I had wanted, when I came in, when I first came in and I was proposing ideas and throwing ideas out to Dave, I wanted to do the phylogeny of stegosaurs. I was going to work out the systematics of stegosaurs and the biogeography of stegosaurs, and about a year and a half into my graduate program, I find out that someone else is already working on this, and they were significantly ahead of me. So there was a little bit of depression in that area. But the crazy thing is, while I was doing that, one of the things that is required of graduate students at Hopkins is to do 2 research rotations. And quick, what a research rotation is, you pick someone in the department who's not your advisor, and you work underneath them on a year-long research project of your own devising and design. And it gives you an idea of their techniques in their laboratory and their methods so that you expand your horizons. And I had already started doing pilot work on ceratopsids. So what did I collect? I collected some Chasmosaur material and some Centrosaurus material from the Smithsonian to just do some exploration. Mark Tieford works on, he was my advisor for this research rotation. He works on dental microwear in primates, and I wanted to get a handle on what does dental microwear look like in dinosaurs, how is it expressed, what portions of the dentition is dental microwear expressed in, if at all. I didn't know at this time. I had no idea of the massive field of dental microwear research that preceded me when I started this, and I didn't even know what dental microwear looked in dinosaurs, and if we could even find it, because all the research that I was reading was mammal dental microwear from modern taxa and dental microwear from, Cenozoic mammals, so the modern microwear used to infer and understand Cenozoic mammals, and I didn't know that it would even be possible to find it in dinosaurs. And there were some publications prior to mine that said, yes, it's there, so that was a positive. And I did this pilot work on Centrosaurus and Chasmosaurus, and it showed quite a bit of dental microwear, and that's when the springboard came. Well, if I can't do this project, there's lots of important questions that dental microwear can answer, particularly in taxa that have teeth, like ceratopsians and some of these ornithischians with large dental batteries that record, right? They have these nice flat surfaces to their dentition, and there's a lot of attritional wear that occurs between the upper and the lower dentition, and it records a lot of information. Whereas in mammals, the crazy thing about mammals is they can have very complex teeth, and you have to deal with particular teeth, and you got to limit yourself to particular facets, and you got to look in particular materials. Whereas the simplicity sometimes of the dinosaurian tooth, where it's enamel on the outside and then a few different types of dentine on the inside that express themselves as a nice flat surface, it lends itself really well to recording motion, right? The striations come out in particular patterns, or the pits come out in particular patterns. So that springboarded me onto this can answer questions about evolution of mastication. And so then it was, well, which group do I choose to look at? And I was particularly interested in the in the ceratopsians, right, because my advisor had already worked on the ornithischians, and we thought that problem was relatively settled, and now things are coming out to show greater diversity there as well. So I went for the ceratopsians, and the nitty-gritty of it is the amount of work that's required to collect dental microware. I mean, I knew of it when I started the pilot work, and I knew of it from my advisor Mark Tieford. But the short of it is, you run around to museums, you do a lot of museuming, and while you're there, you take basically the same compound. It's a polyvinyl siloxane molding compound that a dentist would use to make molds of your teeth. It's basically the same stuff when they put the bite plate in your mouth, and it's full of this material that you bite down on, and it pretty much solidifies within minutes and takes a great mold of your teeth. It's very high resolution. The mammal microware, a lot of times I've seen people typically work at 500x. Dinosaur microware, or at least the dinosaur microware I've been looking at, lends itself to 100x. So we're really not doing super high mag with the scanning electron microscope. It's just that it provides such great contrast, and that it's very hard to see dental microware under a light microscope. You can see it; it's there, but the contrast for quantifying it and seeing the edges of the widths of scratches and whatnot is better underneath a light microscope. So you gather up all these molds. And prior to molding, there's a lot of cleaning. In a way, you quote-unquote brush the dinosaur's teeth. A lot of preservative that's been applied to older specimens over the years can get in the way and fill the cracks of dental microware and completely obliterate the taking of it. So you usually use a cotton swab with acetone or alcohol to try to dissolve away the preservative that may be on these teeth. And then you go in for the molding, and it's a gamble, right? Because it's the fossil record, and not everything is going to give you great dental microware. I've seen the entire spectrum of dental microware, from teeth that are beautiful, and it's almost as if the animal had died yesterday. It has very clean, nice, pristine teeth with lots of striations on it, all the way down to completely obliterated. The skull had either sat out before it was deposited and before it was covered with sediment, and the teeth were either desiccated and eroded that way, or it spent a significant amount of time on the surface before it was collected, and that's how the dental microware was destroyed. For instance, the one taxon that we all know has tons of specimens, Protoceratops, right? It's so many specimens all over the place coming out of the ground in Mongolia and China, and yet it's the one taxon for which I had to work exceptionally hard to find one tooth and of one individual that actually preserved microware on it to tell the story of the Protoceratopsidae branch of Ceratopsia. And if I didn't have that, there would be a lot less resolution in my data. And I went through thousands of teeth, and it was finally one. It was, again, a hallelujah moment where I'm like, looked at it, and I'm like, oh, finally, it has microware on it. I can tell that story. And that microware looks something similar to the Leptoceratops stuff, so I can tell a bigger story than just Leptoceratops. But so then you collect the microware, and you start looking at it by first making casts of your molds, and then you prep them for being ready in an SEM, stub them and sputter coat them with gold palladium so that they'll conduct the electron signal, and then you start looking at them. And I had no idea, other than the ceratopsid stuff, what I was going to see all the way down the tree. And that's when Leptoceratops came into the picture. I had looked at throughout the course of the entire project, I had looked at thousands of teeth, and I had taken about 250 photographs. And I can't remember the exact number of specimens I went through, but I remember the attrition rate of specimens being at 22%. So only 22% of the sample of specimens that I had taken molds of produced dental microware. So that's how bad it gets.
Wow.
And the nice thing is, the crazy thing is, you think that that's nice. I'm saying it's nice, is that it actually reflects something in the literature. And I can't remember what publication this is in particularly. I'm pretty sure it's a Tiford and other authors publication where they were noticing and they were mentioning the attrition rate. Like, what are we seeing as far as what can we mold in the fossil record and what actually produces dental microwear? And I was just slightly lower. I think theirs was like 30, somewhere between 30 and 25%.
Right.
So here we're going back into the Cretaceous, and it's the entire span of the Cretaceous from, the most basal ceratopsians. Actually, I took microwear from Yinlong, so we're going into the late Jurassic now, all the way up to the end of the Cretaceous, and I'm seeing a 22% attrition of specimens. That's actually not bad compared to the mammal stuff, which is very close in percentage for attrition. Right. So that made me happy, but also it illustrates the pull of the recent, right? That you get better data with more recent organisms, and there's less time for attrition and abrasion and loss of fossils due to exposure and whatnot. So the nice thing is that 22% had a good random spread over the tree. It actually wasn't clustered in the Ceratopsidae, right, up near the present. It went throughout the entire tree, save for Yinlong. Unfortunately, there are other specimens of Yinlong that I didn't know about at the time that I might have been able to get dental microwear off, and the only thing that Yinlong gave me was premaxillary teeth dental microwear, so I made some inferences based on that. But it gave a nice spread. And the one taxa that had really good dental microwear was Leptoceratops, particularly the specimen from the Canadian Museum of Nature, CMN 8889, which is the one that is highlighted in that paper. Not only does it have microwear on its occlusal surfaces, it has microwear on its shelf, right? Leptoceratopsids are known for having this labial shelf, or this what's been called the horizontal shelf, this thing that sticks out the side of their teeth. That's kind of a function of differential wear. As the tooth wears down, the two sets of teeth don't completely slide past each other. So as the one set grinds away at the dentary teeth, this shelf starts growing out to the side, and that has dental microwear on it, and there'll be some material coming out from me sometime on that, the microwear on that, which I didn't even address in this Leptoceratops paper that I'm talking about, that wow. We are talking about. So the dental microwear in Leptoceratops was, I started looking at the dentary teeth first. And what shocked me, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, right? You have these moments of disbelief, and it's crazy what I'm having disbelief out of. I'm having disbelief over the most minor thing, right? You'd think that going from straight lines, right, which is what I was seeing in ceratopsids, the large derived ceratopsids like Triceratops have dental microwear that comes out in relatively straight striations, whereas that in Leptoceratops, as you know from reading the paper, is curved. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The teeth are actually, right, I had, a moment of disbelief that the project that I had designed, the ideas that I were going after were bearing fruit. Right? I'm looking at the teeth on the microscope. I remember this day. It's clear as day to me. I was sitting in the basement of an ancillary building next to the building that I did my graduate work in. The basement of this building is where the microscope facilities are. And I'm sitting at the electron microscope, and I'm looking at these curved striations, and I couldn't believe that I was seeing curved striations, and for a number of reasons, right? It goes against what I saw in ceratopsids, and it goes against categorically what we had always assumed all ceratopsians were chewing like, orthal pulpers and orthal slicers, because if they're moving in an orthal direction, we should just see straight scratches, and they should pretty much be oriented dorsoventrally or have a slight angle towards the adductor chamber where the chewing muscles are. So as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about, well, what does this mean? What does this mean for the direction in which the jaws are moving? And I came up with a couple of different hypotheses, and I systematically, I don't know why, I can't remember to this day why I did this, but I always did it this way. I looked at all the dentary teeth of the specimen first before going to the maxillary teeth. So it was when I was in the dentary teeth that I saw this pattern, and I made a prediction right then and there. My prediction was, well, if the dentition is moving in the semicircular direction that I proposed in the paper, where it comes up, right, and kind of moves backwards at the same time it's coming up, then the maxillary teeth should trace out the counterpart pattern. It should be in the reverse. So if the dentary teeth, the scratch is starting posteriorly and curving forward, then the maxillary teeth should show the beginning of the scratch starting anteriorly and curving backwards, curving towards the tail. And that's exactly what it showed. When I finally got around to the maxillary teeth, it showed the counterpart pattern. And I remember jumping out of my chair, running through the buildings, running back to Dave's office, and I did this. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited, right? When you find these things out, I have two ideas about this. As the paleontologist in me, it's, oh, this is so exciting, I've got to tell Dave. And then, because you want somebody else who's worked on mastication and ornithischians to hear what you have to say, because it's so watershed. It's like, well, this changes everything for ceratopsians. And then on the other hand, I'm running through the halls and I realize you're running towards your advisor and you're going to tell him about scratches on a dinosaur's tooth. That's so geeky.
No, but that's science. That's science.
It's science, and it's wonderful. Right, and I really don't think Dave appreciated it at the time. I mean, he knew what I was saying, but and he understood what I was saying, and maybe because I didn't draw it out for him, he was in the middle of something when I came and disturbed him. So I don't think he truly appreciated how excited I was over it. And so the nice thing is, Leptoceratops tells the story because it has the best microware, but that story is not limited to Leptoceratops. I have microware of similar ilk from many other ceratopsians, and as to where that begins and ends, I kind of don't want to say right now.
Sure. Because
I'm working on trying to get that story out, because that's the bigger story. The story of Leptoceratops is such that Leptoceratops tells the story so well that it's a perfect organism to define the chewing style in. And as you saw, right, I've named this style as circumpalinal because it generally moves in a palinal direction, which palinal chewing is, backwards, right? This caudal kind of direction. Your jaw comes up and then it moves backwards, but it does it in a very fluid motion where the jaw comes up and moves backwards at the exact same time, so that you draw this arc with your lower jaw. And really what this thing is doing is it's basically tracing out in the teeth the motion that's probably occurring in the glenoid, in the jaw articulation between the articular and the quadrate bone, as it's got a cupped shape to the jaw joint, and as the quadrate sits in the back part of the jaw joint, right, it's kind of at the upper edge, and then as the jaw comes further into occlusion, the quadrate goes down into the depression of the articular, the glenoid fossa there of the jaw joint, and then as you further progress, it rides up the rostral wall of the glenoid, so it's in a way, as the jaw is tracing out the shape of the jaw joint, it's also recording that on the striations of the teeth. And so Leptoceratops tells this good story, and it also tells it well because of the labial shelf, the structure that sits out on the side of the dentition. I'm made only a tangential reference to this in the Leptoceratops paper, but we've all assumed that from the first descriptions of Leptoceratops that this shelf was horizontal. And on some teeth it is horizontal. And a lot of descriptions refer back to the original Sternberg description where he describes it as being a horizontal shelf, and then Ostrom mentions the horizontal shelf a couple of times. But when you really look at non-ceratopsid neoceratopsian teeth, anything that starts making this little shelf, it isn't horizontal. It actually takes the shape. A lot of times it takes the shape of a apex of a roof. It looks, right, when you look at it in side view, in lateral view, it looks like a roof where it's got one edge is tilting one way and the other edge is tilting the other way. And the nice thing is now that we have this, the two go hand in hand. The type of mastication and the shape of the shelf are connected. The type of mastication explains why the shelf is shaped the way it is. When two teeth interact, right, a lot of times you don't get one tooth always interacting with another tooth. There's variation along the length of the dental row, which dentary teeth are going to interact with which maxillary teeth, and how many they interact with. But if one dentary tooth, or say two dentary teeth, come to interact with one maxillary tooth, then that maxillary tooth, when the dentition comes into occlusion, will slide across the dentary tooth, let's say the tooth number one, we'll call dentary tooth number one the more forward one, and dentary tooth number two the one that's more posterior, right? The maxillary tooth will come into in articulation with dentary tooth number two first, and it will slide across the anterior surface of dentary tooth two, and then as the jaw progresses, it will interact with dentary tooth one, and then it will slide across the surface of dentary tooth one. And as it's doing this, it draws out that kind of U shape. So you get half of the U on dentary tooth 1 and half of the U on dentary tooth 2.
Right.
And that's the sides of the apex, because now you need to incorporate another maxillary tooth to finish off why these teeth would have kind of apex-like structures. And the microwear bears that out too, right? As the anterior surface, this kind of the shelf, the microwear is always usually going forward. It's either going forward or it's pointing forward and lateral off to the side of the lips. So the material that's being dragged across it is always being shoved towards the rostrum, towards the snout.
Right.
And that was a watershed moment for me. Like, wow, now I'm seeing, not only am I seeing the microwear, but the microwear and the jaw mechanic model explain the morphology that it's being expressed in the tooth itself. And it pulls it, right, the great aspect of a theory or a hypothesis, well, particularly your theory, right, if we have this model, is its explanatory power. And now this model has explanatory power for why the teeth express the shapes that they do, not just in Leptoceratops, but in a lot of these other taxa that start forming this shelf.
Well, if you didn't have the microwear evidence, would someone have been able to conclude by the shape of the jaw and by the attachments of the muscles, would they have concluded your same conclusion, which is the chewing motion is different? Would they have done that, or did it take the microwear evidence to point you in that direction that this is how the animal chewed?
Well, I'm going to be biased and honest at the same time. The honesty of it is that if you're really good at noticing things, if we erased all the microwear, taking notice of the shape of the shelf that I just described,
right,
might lead you, because what you're looking at is the difference between the macrowear or the facet formation, so basically the shelf and the vertical facet together. If you looked at those two together and you stared at it for a long while, plus taking into account the morphology of the glenoid, you might be able to come to it. However, just the glenoid and the muscles themselves, by themselves, aren't going to be able to tell you that story. All right, so if you're looking at things that have shelves, and not everything has a shelf, and some things that do have a shelf only express the shelf very slightly. So you'd really have to start paying attention to the curvature or the shape of the shelf.
Right.
So yes, you could, but you'd be limited in the range of taxa along the tree that you'd be able to make that deduction. And then if you wanted to expand that deduction, you'd have to have the microwear, because in theory you could chew the way that I've proposed for Leptoceratops, and you could get away without ever forming a shelf if your dentition slid past each other completely. Right? So you could move in a semicircular motion. Your dentary teeth would come up in between your maxillary teeth so fully that they wouldn't allow the dentary teeth to develop a shelf. And if you didn't have a shelf without the microwear, you're not going to be able to determine whether something is moving in a semicircular motion, or whether it's moving in an orthal motion or a palinal motion, or I can't think. Clinolineal motion that Serino and others proposed for Psittacosaurus.
Right.
So the microwear, now on the biased side, the microwear is really needed to tell the complexity of the story, and particularly so for ceratopsids, because when I was looking at the ceratopsians, they don't have nice, neat microwear. If you can think back to the Leptoceratops paper, that microwear was eye-catching. You looked at the microwear, and all of the striations were moving in a semicircular path, and they were all curving together across the surface. And it was eye-catching, and it was very uniform. However, when you look at ceratopsids, there's a lot of variation in the directions. They're straight, right? The microwear in a lot of ceratopsids are very linear, but you can get sets of linear striations. You can get sets that are oriented towards the adductor chamber. You can get sets that are a little more horizontally oriented towards the adductor chamber. And then you can get a set that's kind of counterintuitive, where it would be oriented towards the snout from postero-inferior to antero-dorsal, if you will, right, going towards the snout. And these directions, right, if you just had the flat surface of the occlusal surface, since by the time we get to ceratopsids, we lose the shelf and it's this nice smooth surface, you wouldn't know that at all. That dental microwear tells a very complex story. If you just looked at the morphology, and you looked at the glenoid, and you looked at the occlusal surface, you would think that this animal chews in a very orthopalinal direction, where it comes up and back at the exact same time, and that's the straight line going towards the adductor chamber where all the adductor muscles are. And that's what you would assume or presume, and you'd be right for doing so, because that's all the evidence tells you you're capable of assuming. And yet, if you look at the microwear, there's something greatly more complex going on. And the nice thing is that when Jordan Mallon did his dissertation, and he published his work on the ecological dynamics of the dinosaur park formation, right? He looked at a lot of things, but one of the things he looked at was dental microwear in variety of taxa in the same environment, to try to see if dental microwear is going to pull out a dietary difference signal. So when he did hadrosaurs and some ankylosaurs and a lot of the ceratopsids from the dinosaur park formation, his work came out to show the exact same thing as my work, and that was nice, because here's a person totally outside myself, right, looking at the exact same things, and his goal is to come at the truth, and my goal is to come at the truth as best as we possibly can, and apparently I'm not a liar.
Yeah. Well, that's the best part about science. A lot of people have a very not to sound derogatory, but a very narrow understanding of when a scientist makes a conclusion or a hypothesis and shares it. We don't understand the sheer volume of work that goes into it. And so you take all of the incredible amount of work that you did in yours, and like you say, you compare that to Dr. Mallon's, and his conclusions are a positive reinforcement of yours. It demonstrates, just like you said, two totally different scientists that are not working together, that don't have a preconceived outcome, but follow the evidence and arrive at the same thing. That's got to be very satisfying for a scientist.
It is. And it for many reasons, right? It's satisfying on the two big reasons that we're kind of dancing around here. The big reason of you always like to have your work confirmed. That's emotionally satisfying and ego satisfying.
Right.
But then there's the level of this is, like you said, this is the process of science. We've just illustrated replication, right? The experimental replication as best as it can be in paleontology. When someone else with a different set of eyes goes and checks out what you're doing and on different taxa, right? So not necessarily did we work on we may have worked on the same taxa per se, but we definitely didn't overlap in specimens. There were a few specimens where we looked at the exact same specimens, but what this does is it expands the field of specimens that were looked at. So I looked at some specimens from the museums that I had traveled around and looked at, and he looked at a bunch of stuff. And yeah, we probably overlapped on the specimens that are housed in the Terrell Museum because I could not have avoided going there. That would be a mistake on my part because that would be not collecting the diversity of samples that I needed. But because we didn't overlap completely, and he had this bigger sample or different sample than I had, his sample told the exact same story that mine did, and that is satisfying and is absolutely confirming, and it confirms the research and it confirms the process of science, right? And if he had come to different conclusions, then that would raise the question of what's going on here. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily refute either of us,
sure,
but it would make both of us have to look at the data, like why is Varriale getting different results from Malin, and is that result different because of different taxa or different methodologies or how? And the nice thing was, I mean, with all the possible human error that can creep in to analyzing dental microware, from, the molding to, taking the photographs, right? You got to keep your photographs oriented in a particular direction. You don't want to get too much tilt on your specimen, or you're going to bias your length measurements and various other things. That with all those things that could creep in, these two researchers doing it totally differently, and in some cases we did use slightly different methods, came out to tell the same story, that ceratopsians had very complex dental microware.
Well, it's just so amazing to me, the fact that you're using a scanning electron microscope to look at the tooth of a dinosaur and be able to formulate an idea and then use the remaining science to verify the idea. I just hope people understand, if they're fortunate enough to read your paper, it's amazing, but the sheer amount of work that goes into it, sometimes it's hard to get your mind around all of the things. Like earlier when you and I first spoke, you talked about the need to be able to chart all of this information and how time consuming that was. But you adapted by taking a program and enhancing that. Can you tell us a little bit about that part?
Okay. So one of the things that when I first started my pilot work, I was measuring dental microware by hand, and it was due to my ignorance. I didn't have to at the time, all right? But there's something instructive about doing it by hand, that you appreciate the physicality of it. You start to appreciate what dental microware is and how it expresses itself just by measuring a lot of the lengths and widths of these features by hand. So I took a bunch of photographs of dental microware, and I printed them out on 8x11 sheet of paper, and I used a protractor and pencil to measure up at least, I think, between the two taxa, I probably measured over 1,000, slightly over 1,000 microware features. And it was hugely time-consuming, and I could appreciate why the early researchers, why there wasn't a huge analyses, why large analyses of many taxa and many teeth were not done early on, because there was this limitation. There was this physical limitation of a human being can only measure so much microware before you go crazy and you want to pull the hair out of your head. Yeah. And so then it became, well, how can we automate this? How can I get this image on a computer and be able to take these data digitally? Because by that time you could. I mean, this was 2002, 2003 that I was doing these things by hand. And I knew in the back of my mind that I didn't have to do it by hand, that there was a way that you could not do it by hand. However, the weird thing is that the program Microware 4.02 that Peter Hunger had developed for primate dental microware and mammal dental microware, it took angles, but it didn't take angles. It didn't produce like a spreadsheet full of angles, and the angles were associated with their feature. It would do it one at a time. So you clicked the length and the width of your feature, and then you hit return, and there you got your data. And so that would be slow, right? Collecting it one at a time, and then having to turn to a spreadsheet and then type your little angles in one at a time as Microware clicked them out. But after talking with Peter Unger, he told me that, and I had always known this because I had remember collecting this file, but I never really went and looked at what the file was until we had our conversation. And what the file is it's a coordinate file. When you click the lengths and widths of your Microware feature, it's collecting 4 different coordinate points, right? It's collecting the XY axis so when you do Microware on this program, you click one end with your mouse, you click the other end with your mouse, and you click the 2 ends of the width. And those 4 points record the feature, right? And it records it as, so technically those 4 points are actually, each one of them is actually an XY coordinate. So knowing that, right, knowing that this card file is full of XY coordinates, right, I started to look at, so which way does it record it? Does it put the data, and I'm sorry that my explanation may not be the clearest on this, but it's hard to visualize the explanation. All right, so when you click a point on that sheet of data that comes out, does it record it in order of clicking? Like the first click you make, does it put that as the first 2 coordinates? And the second click you make, does that make it the second 2 coordinates? And ultimately, that's how it did it, right? You got this series of coordinates. So if you clicked the width first, that would be the first 2 sets of coordinates. But on the next feature you decided to take, if you clicked the length first, that would be the first 2 set of coordinates. So then that was a little bit disconcerting, because now I'm looking at a giant field of data and I'm thinking, oh no, I don't know which one's length and which one's width. But eventually I could math that out. I was able to write a couple of columns in this program that I wrote, right, to take that Microware coordinate data, and ultimately if you give the program this Excel Visual Basic program that I wrote, a little macro for Excel, because you can import these Cartesian point data into Excel and get it as a bunch of columns of data. And then if you let the macro run, right, it will take the data and it will sort them, right? It will figure out which set is longer than the other, because the 2 sets are always going to be with each other. Either the first 2 are length or the first 2 are width. So from that, you can just use trigonometry to figure out which one is the length and which one is the width and which one's longer than the other. And then you can start using trigonometry to figure out, so now you get rid of the width because you don't care about that. You care about it in so much as that's the width in micrometers of that particular scratch. But ultimately, for calculating angles of striations, you care about the longer feature, the one that is the scratch, and then how is that scratch oriented. So ultimately, I had to write a program for Visual Basic in Excel that would suss all that out and then give me the length and the width and the angle of that scratch and put it all together at the end, so that I didn't have to go and do all these things by hand, either by hand, with a protractor, right, or by hand once I clicked the 2 ends and the width in Microware, looking at the value that it gave me for the angle. Ugh. And it was a week's worth of work. I can't remember the individual's name, but I thank this guy up and down. I'm pretty sure I wrote it into my acknowledgement section of my dissertation. I found, we all know Excel was created by Microsoft, and it's a program that was heavily used in the business industry. That was, its primary purpose was for spreadsheet analysis in business. So a lot of the people who teach, right, how to create and do macros are from the business world. And this one individual had this awesome little textbook of quick and dirty how to write, Excel macros. And I downloaded his little blog, and I made my own PDF so I could just reference it whenever I wanted. And from his work, I, quickly, and it's not hard because Visual Basic is nice that when you go and you do a function in Excel, it records, right? You can have it record functions. So as you're doing a function, like, say, dividing something by something else and then multiplying a column, right, it will record the basic programming language that is necessary for it. So you can quickly teach yourself this by going back and forth and looking, well, what did I just do? And what's the text of programming language that comes out? And then once you learn that function, right, you really don't need to go back and do it again. You've got it. And so it took me a week to suss out how to get these coordinate point data into a program that would make angles. And ultimately, I made myself a test sheet. I drew a bunch of angles at all possible orientations. I measured them up with a protractor to get the actual angle, and then I put that image into Microware, and I digitized that test image, and then I ran it through my program, and when it finally spat out the exact angles, that's when I was telling you before, I threw my hands in the air, and I was screaming hallelujah, because right then and there I realized, right, that week's worth of work, that's all I was doing that entire week, but that 1 week's worth of programming probably saved me thousands of man hours of measuring.
You see?
Now I can just measure, I can click and forget about it, and then go grab these files and run them through my little macro and have them crank out the angles.
Oh, see, the best part of that is you put in all this unbelievable amount of time and effort and research, and then people like me and other people, we can just take what your research demonstrated, and we can walk up to somebody and say, hey, want to know how Leptoceratops chews?
This is how it chews.
Yeah,
right?
It was very simplistic. I'm able to.
And the funny, you touched on something, and I just want to add my version of it. We've danced around this idea of how involved doing science is, right? The depth to which a researcher goes to tease the information out of something. And I've had, like we were talking about creationism before, and climate science denial, and how does a scientist know, and just communicating the depth, right? I had a moment like you were talking about with my family, where I looked at one of my family members and I said, you don't realize the amount of work that's gone into someone coming up with their idea about why a particular thing is the way it is. And I'll give you an example. And I gave them my example. I said, do you not realize that I worked for 6 years of my life? 6 years of my life were devoted just to figuring out how ceratopsians chewed their food.
Right.
That's it. I didn't do anything else. Right. I didn't work on any other dinosaurs. I didn't work outside of dinosaurs. I just worked on ceratopsians chewing their food. I didn't even look at any of the other anatomy of ceratopsians other than the jaw apparatus. And that's what it took. It took 6 years of collecting data. Right? I had a year and a half to 2 years of collecting data. Right? It was running around to museums for 1 year, and then it was another half a year just making the thousands of molds from all those many thousands of tiny teeth, taking those peels and turning them into cup-like little molds that would receive the epoxy resin, and making all the molds, and then stubbing all the molds, and then sputter coating all the molds. I must have spent like a week sitting at the sputter coater, and the sputter coater only does about 10 specimens a shot. So I don't know how much gold palladium I spent in sputter coating thousands of specimens. I mean, you could probably take my specimens out of my cabinet, melt them down, and get some money out of them.
But you're right. It's what we, the public, see is the very simplistic end result. And sometimes that can be dismissed because it sounds so simplistic. And and the famous words that I get frustrated in is when it's how do you know? Well, in one aspect, that's a great way to start the conversation. But when it's done as a derogatory term or an argumentative term, as a scientist, you must be so frustrated to think that you've got 6 years of work on your end and somebody on the other side has nothing more than a brief understanding of what you do, and they dismiss it as you woke up yesterday and said, here's what I think this animal did.
Absolutely.
That's got to be frustrating.
It is, and the deniers, whatever, no matter what you're denying, they're throwing words, all right, and the irony is they should throw those words at themselves, especially this particular word. And I love this word because it describes the situation deeply and truly. The word is hubris, right? They throw at us like, you're scientists, you have the hubris to say these things. No, we don't have the hubris. We have the data and the hard work and the evidence that not only we as individuals, but many other individuals have looked at and confirmed those results. You, sir, are on the other side, do have the hubris. You're the one in your ignorance and your lack of knowledge who thinks that you can so easily dismiss what many other scientists and many other researchers, the conclusions that these people have come to through hard work and gathering of evidence and analyzing data and coming to these conclusions, right? It really is hubris on the part of the individual who thinks that they have the knowledge when they don't, because they are not specialists in a particular field, right? It would be equivalent, right, to a lawyer, right? Why would you go to a lawyer for medical advice?
Right.
Or it would be equivalent to you looking, you go to your doctor and you don't like his opinion. And that's fine. That's the point of getting a second opinion. That's, in a way, science. You go to your second doctor. He tells you the same thing as your first. You go to your third doctor. He tells you the same thing as your first. Now you've pretty much spent a lot of money going to 3 different doctors, but you could spend some more money and go to more doctors. And you go to 97 doctors out of 100. Right? I'm referring to the 97% here. And they tell you the exact same story. Then in your hubris and your arrogance, you're going to turn around and say, no, I don't believe what the doctors are telling me. It boggles the mind. It's mind-blowing that a human being can dismiss and do that. And some of the dismissal, right? Some of the dismissal is outright. So we're arguing 2 sets of things here. Some of the dismissal is just outright actually doing what I described. Some of the dismissal is just due to ignorance. Like, I don't know. I'm not aware. I'm a lay person. I'm not aware of the depth of the research that is behind global climate change or whatever topic, and I just don't know. And that ignorance, right, and I mean ignorance in the truest state of the word, not as an insult, but lack of knowledge in a particular area, that ignorance allows that person to be as vocal and boisterous and as demanding or as forceful as they can be, because they don't know any better. And it's getting them to understand the depth of the research behind certain things that's really got to be the clincher, right? And it is. It's unfortunate that, right, it's hard for us as scientists to to realize this because we've gone all our lives not being this way, right? I've ever since high school, I've moved into a science career, and those who are interested in science move in this direction. You understand the depth, you start to understand the depth of the research and the quality of the work that's been done on something, all right? And it's not something where one scientist has proposed this thing and it's in only one journal, all right? The case in point, our thing we're harping on all the time here, climate change, right? This is massive amounts of research done by many different research institutions all around the world and many different government organization research institutions, and they're all telling us the same story. And there's only one way around that. There's only one denial way around that, and the only way around that is to just imagine yourself up a little conspiracy of all of scientists all together telling us the same story for some unknown economic goal. And that's just crazy to me. That's
Well, I'm frustrated that I'm never invited to the big parties that must go on.
No, I know. Where is all this money? And the crazy thing is, I know some of these climate change scientists, and I know that they are not getting, billions and billions of dollars worth of money. And I know them as people, and I know that they're not lying. I know.
Right. I think the best comment I ever heard, I met a person who's actually involved in the climate change study, and we were talking, and I said, your results, I asked him, do you think your results could be wrong? And his answer was, God, I hope they are. But
my goodness, I know.
And I thought, now there's an example of somebody that doesn't have a vested interest in the result. The results are what the results are. There's no room for debate. I mean, you can debate how the results were attained, but like you said, when 95 other people in the room of 100 attained the same result, but all using different methods, it's kind of like when you talked about, Dr. Mallon's result and your result. You didn't sit down at the table together and say, okay, what are we gonna do? What's the
We're going to collude together to make sure that dental microwear and ceratopsians turns out to be the same.
Which is the next big thing coming up, I'm afraid. We need to drag you in front of Congress because I got a feeling there's a big conspiracy going on. Oh my gosh. Well, you had mentioned earlier that you've got some other research and stuff that you can't share at this time. But boy, we would sure really like to have you back if you'd be interested in coming back when you get, the next thing you get published or the next big news.
Sure.
Boy.
Well, the crazy thing is it's out, but it's not out.
Sure.
There's a couple of it came out in full in 11 when I gave my dissertation talk at SVP, but these are only abstracts, right? And unfortunately, I mean, life is a mixed bag, right? Where I am, I have a decently high teaching load. I love the classes that I teach. I get to teach comparative vertebrate anatomy, and I'll teach a dinosaurs class next semester, so I can't, begrudge that because I get to teach a variety of courses that really satisfy my desire as a paleontologist, but it also prevents the research from flowing out in a nice, neat, orderly way. So a lot of the stuff that is talked about or that I mentioned on ceratopsians, it's there in my dissertation. My dissertation is available online, so it's not like it's not public knowledge, but it hasn't been published yet in peer-reviewed journals.
Right.
So that's why I'm a little bit more hesitant to talk about it and just mention it tangentially. Whereas the Leptoceratops stuff we now know is out and it's been reviewed and it tells a great story about Leptoceratops mastication. And now anybody else who comes along and looks at ceratopsians, especially a particular chunk of ceratopsia, is very likely to see something similar to what I've already named in Leptoceratops.
Right. Well,
but yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
When that next thing comes out, give me a call, and I'll definitely love to come back and chat with you.
Great. Well, he is an assistant professor of biology from Kings College and performed an absolute amazing study with years, plural, worth of work on the chewing habits of Leptoceratops. Dr. Frank Varriale, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to share your research with us. I really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome, George. Thank you for the invite.
You bet.
Have a nice vacation.
Yes, you too.
Bye.
All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I really appreciate the interview we had with Dr. Frank Varriale, who is the Assistant Professor of Biology from Kings College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Love talking about Leptoceratops. He's a great little dinosaur, and I hope you guys enjoyed learning information about him. And I really hope you got a lot out of Dr. Varriale's interview when it comes to the amount of work that goes into doing the things that scientists do. Please make sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You'll see links on my podcast page to both of those. Make sure to visit my online catalog, store.dinosaurgeorge.com. If there's anything in there that you'd like, I would appreciate you buying it from me. And then finally, go to my website, dinosaurgeorge.com, and there's lots to see on there as well. And if you have a question, I didn't have time to get to any questions on this podcast, but I'll be doing one very shortly that'll only involve answering questions, and you can see all that information on my podcast as well. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, treat everybody with respect and courtesy, and remember, if the opportunity arises for you to do something nice for someone, please take advantage of that, not just for them, but for you. And you'll know exactly what I mean when you do it. The feeling you get of being kind is so much better than the feeling we get of being hateful towards people that we don't like or don't agree with. So take care, everybody, and I will look forward to bringing new guests to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Dinosaur George Show. Please follow us on our social media links and join our mailing list. If you're interested in having Dinosaur George speak at your event, please visit our website at dinosaurgeorge.com. Until next time, keep digging for clues about the past.